Hi everyone. Myself Anju here. So today we are going to discuss about the service account. So the service account, we already done a topic here with the default service account, which is being used on the pods, right? So we had discussed about the service account and RBAC. So we know what is RBAC. RBAC is a role-based access control. Is how the Kubernetes control who can do what inside the cluster, right? Instead of giving the full access to everyone. So RBAC lets you define who the user, like what actions need to be can be done, kind of get, list, create, or delete. That can be given in the RBAC on what resource, like it can be pods, deployments, or service, or etc. So there are some key components we can use in the RBAC, like we can provide a role-based access, define a permission within a namespace. Example, allow reading the pods in a new namespace. And the cluster role, same as a role only, but applies in a cluster wide. So in a cluster, what all the resources we have, all that will be implied. And we have the role binding and the cluster role binding. So role binding is used for attaching a role to a user or a service account. And the cluster role binding attaches a cluster role to a user or a service account. So this is a difference between the service account and the RBAC. So let's show you one diagram here so that you get an idea. So we have Kubernetes API server here, and it actually, there is a service account in between, like identity inside the cluster. It actually uses a authenticated using token. So token mounted automatically in the pods. So that will be with the help of the service account. And the path of where run something this path, and the token will be there, and there will be a CS certificate. So basically using this token and the CS certificate, the pods will be communicating with the Kube API server in a secure way. So all this authentication, authorization mechanism provided by the service account. So let's see how to create a service account manually, and we use that service account in a pod using the role and role binding. As I said, we have two types of roles, the components. One is role and the role binding. So we are going to use now the role, which is limited to on a namespace, but the cluster role, which is cluster wide, cluster inside the cluster, what all the resources we have, we can use it on all the entire cluster itself. So just I'm logging into the Kubernetes server. Here, kubectl get nodes. Yeah, the Kubernetes control plane is ready here. And next, I'm going to create the manifest files for creating the specific cluster role. So first one, I'm going to create a service account here. And so I'll just create a file called sa.yaml. So a short name for the service account. And in that, I'm going to write some YAML code for creating the service account. So we can see that API version is v1 and the kind is service account. And under the metadata, I'm just saying the name of the service account and then namespace, in which namespace we are going to create this service account. So that's all. Even if you want to check any name, the service account is already existing. kubectl get service account. Or we can say just SA is enough, the short name. So we can see there is a one service account already there with the name of default. Now we are going to create a service account, kubectl apply -f sa.yaml. Now if I check kubectl get SA, we can see that there is one service account created, then a name called pod-reader-sa. If I say kubectl describe and the service account name pod-reader-sa, we can see the description of that particular service account, the name of the service account. And there are many other things are none, which is in the namespace default. Okay, so the service account is ready. The next step is we need to create a role file and we need to use a role binding to bind that role to a pod. Okay, next we can say role.yaml. Inside we can say like few parameters. So first one is API version. So API version is RBAC organization.k8s.io/v1. Kind is role and the metadata. The name of this role is pod-reader-role and in the default namespace, the rules. Here, what resource we are going to use here? So we have to specify the API groups before that. So in the API groups, you can see there is a double quote here. So double quote in the sense, it is one of the group. It's called core group. I mean, the pods, some of the resources which comes under the core API groups. So that is the reason we specify the double quote. Double quote in the sense, one of the group, it's called core group. So then we can specify the resources. So what resource we are going to use, it's called pods. And we can just say the verbs here and what commands we are going to use, like get command list. So from the pod, we should be able to get the pod's detail from the created pod, right? So just save that. And the next one is we need to create the role file. So we can say kubectl apply -f the role.yaml kubectl get role. We can see here one role is created. kubectl describe role and say that the role name, it's called the role-reader-role. So we can see that description here in the resource. You can see it's all resource and we can see the verbs, we can see the get and list, right? Now we need to associate this with this using the role binding, right? So we have to create a role binding here. We have to create another YAML file. Vim role, the file name is RoleBinding.yaml. And we need to save some YAML content here. So we can see here the version is same here. And the role binding kind is role binding. R and the B should be in the caps. And the metadata, we can see that the name of this role binding is pod-reader binding, and the namespace we created in the default. And in the subjects, we can see this is where actually the relation comes. Like, in the subject kind, service account, and name, the pod-reader-a. This is the service account we created, and the name of the service account is pod-reader-sa, and in which default that service account is residing in the default namespace and the role reference. So we are going to say that which role actually going to use here. The role is kind role, and the name of the role is pod-reader-role, and the API group is RBAC organization.k8s.io. So this actually the role reference here and the which service account, right? So kubectl apply -f role binding.yaml. Now, if I check kubectl get role binding, you can see there is a role binding created. So kubectl describe role binding space and say that the role binding name here. So we can see that more information. So the role binding spelling. Yep. So we can see here that role binding, the role is role and the name of the role here, and which service account we are going to use. It's pod-reader-sa, which is the default namespace, right? So now once that is created, next we can create a pod here, right? So the pod.yaml, and in that we can say that what all the details we are going to use here inside the pod. So this is a pod like API v1 kind pod metadata. the name of the pod, curl-pod. And here in the spec, we can say that which service account we are going to use, right? So only thing we need to say that which service account we are going to use. By default, all the pods having a default service account. But this time we created our own service account and we created a role and a role binding, which is nothing but RBAC, and both are associated. And this service account we are referring in this pod manifest file. And below we can see the other things are container, name of the container, which image we are using, and the command to stay that container for some time, right? So just save that, kubectl apply -f pod.ym. kubectl get pods. It takes some time to create. We need to wait for some time. Yes, it's up and running. kubectl describe pod curl-pod. Now we go and check on the top of that service account. We can see here the service account name is called pod-reader-sc. So which means the service account is the right one, the pod used, right? So next thing, we can just log in inside the pod, kubectl exec -get pods, kubectl exec -it curl-pod bin sh. So we are inside the pod now. Now we can say that some of the command to run, like the first thing here is a token where we have for run secrets kubernetes.io/service account token. So here we have this token to authenticate to the API server. And we have another parameter like also specify here. So there are two variables we need to create. One with this, the token file path. It's called the token, the variable name should be token, paste here. So token and that file path, the token file path. And the next one is the kube API DNS name, right? So just we can see here the https://kubernetes.defaults.svc. So this is the name of the API server. And the next thing, we are going to use a curl command to get the list of the pods from the default namespace. So we are going to run a curl command -k and -h. And here we are going to say that which token we are going to use. So the token file path we already defined in this variable and kube API variable. So that the variable we already defined here, right? The kube API. So this is our and /API v1 and namespace and the default pods. So this will show you the pods which are there in the default namespace. So we are able to read that, right? The default namespace. So what all the pods are there in the default namespace, we are able to see from inside a pod. Usually we cannot list any pods or any kind of resources cannot be accessed from the pod because the default service account will not providing any permission to a pod to access any resources. So we created a separate service account and we created a RBAC in that. So that, and we use that RBAC service account to create this pod. And that is the reason we are able to access and list out these pods from the default namespace. So that's all for this class. I hope you have understood everything, whatever we discussed. Let's see in the different class with another topic. Thanks, Anju.